All right, so welcome back. What we're going to look in this one is we're going to look at the add and remove options. So going back to the card tester, we're going to add the ability to both look at adding a card. So for this to work, I'm going to need the scanner, and we'll call it input. And that needs to come from system.in. We're going to get the response from the user. So we're going to ask them if they actually want to do it. So just a confirmation. And we're going to check to see if the response, we're going to convert it to lowercase, and then we're going to check to see if it equals yes. If it does, we're going to actually add it to the hands. So in order to do this, we need to talk to the deck. So we're going to get the deck to get us to deal us a new card. And then we're going to have the hand add the card. So one thing to notice is that I don't have add card. It doesn't exist. So I'm going to have to go to my hand and create an add card method. So this is a manipulator, add card. So when I'm adding the card, the only thing I really need to check is to make sure that I haven't gone over my number of cards. So as long as I have less than 5 cards, the cards at num cards is going to equal the new card. And num cards gets increased. This means if we try to add a card and the hand is full, it doesn't actually get added. Now, what we could do technically in terms of the add card to hand is we could also try to do maybe a check before we ask to say, hey, hand, are you already full? And then if they try to add it, give them an error message. That would be a better option, but I will leave that as to for something for you to look at. I'm just going to keep it simple for this video. The next thing that we're going to look at is how we could maybe look at removing a card from a hand. This one's a little bit more interesting because we're going to actually ask them to enter the number that they'd like to delete. So for this to work, I'm going to create a for loop that's going to print off each of the cards in the hand. So same sort of for loop that I did earlier. I'm going to grab the card. So notice that I'm getting the card at I. But when I'm printing this out, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it the option. So I'm going to add some brackets in there. So I'm just doing a little bit of formatting. Again, if I left it to my hand to do this formatting, every time I needed to have a different kind of format for output, the hand would have to deal with that. That means my hand would get really complicated. But since this is my output class, it gets to have it print out hands and cards in different ways without the hand having to look at it anything differently. It keeps the hand class, the deck class, and the card class really simple, and it means that when I have to change something, I only have to change it in one place. So it makes my life a little bit easier too. So we're going to add in the scanner again. Now I'm going to do something a little bit differently than maybe something that you've done. I'm going to actually read it in as a string. And this is a really good opportunity for us to talk about the try-catch block. Next line. Okay, so we're going to grab the card index, and we're going to set it initially to be just a little too high. And then what we're going to do is we're going to try to convert this. So we're going to try to save the card index by converting the integer to the string, to an integer. However, if this fails, we're going to catch it as an exception. So since that's the only thing we know that's happened, we would know that there has been an error. So we'll just say, oh boy. we'll just make a mention to them. Again, we could get a little bit tricky here where we'd keep asking them until they give us a valid number, or we could force them to go back to the menu and come back. It's your choice as to how that would work. I would think about what would make more sense for the user. Okay. And then once we have that figured out, we can start working our way through what we're trying to do. Okay. So we now have the ability to actually check what we've got. We want to check the card index. So if the card index is less than 0, or card index is greater than my hand dot get num cards. So again, we're doing another boundary check to make sure we're not doing something silly. If they have done something like that, we'll just say card number out of bounds. Otherwise, they have given us a valid option. And we'll say my hand remove. Oops. Remove card at a certain card index. Again, that doesn't exist yet. We'll have to make that. So we have to go. So now that I have this option, I have this need, I have to go over to the hand, and it has to be able to remove a card. So now we have to add that into the hand. So we're going to go to public void remove card. There's the index of the card we want to remove. We're going to assume that the hand doesn't know if it's in bounds or not. It's always good to over-engineer a problem. So if it gets something that's not allowed to happen, it's just going to return. Notice it's not returning anything because it's returning void. This is essentially the method version of break for a loop. It's a trick. You don't have to do it. You could just add an if statement and it would do the same thing. So if it's valid, do this for loop, else nothing will happen. So it would only go in if there's an if statement. Similar to what I've done here, right? So here I use an if statement instead of checking to see if something's valid. Here's another way of handling an error, which is to check the boundaries in return. Two ways of handling possible bad input. So in this case, I'm going to set it to the index, num cards. This is really just following the algorithm that I showed you guys in class. It's no different. Don't forget to decrease the number of cards, otherwise it does not work. And there we go. So we have all the functionality we need now. So as we go back, there we go. Everything's up and running. We should run a test to make sure that our changes work. So I'm going to print out my cards. So print out my cards. There we go. I'm going to remove a card. There we go. We can see the options being printed out. I'm going to remove the king. And then I'm going to print out my cards again. There we go. We can see that we have removed. Oh, I made a mistake. I removed the wrong one. I forgot to change my value. So notice that when they give in the value, they're going to be giving me something between 1 and 5, and I wanted something between 0 and 4. What I forgot to do is do card index minus minus. Whoopsie. So that's why I removed the wrong one, but I've made that change. So let's just run this again so we have a good sense of what we're looking at. So I'm going to remove a card from my hand. I'm going to remove the 10 in this case. Print all my cards. Notice that the 10 is no longer there. And now I'm going to be able to add something to my hand. I say yes. And then I can print out my hand again. There it is. Notice how every time I remove and I wanted to add, I actually wanted to print out the cards. So let's actually change this a little bit. So every time I add to my hand, I'm going to print my hand, and every time I remove my card, I'm going to print my hand. Isn't it nice that I made a function that did that? Otherwise, I'd have to rewrite a whole bunch of code, eh? So now if I rerun this again, I now have something that's slightly better. So now I can remove a card. So let's say I remove the first card, and it reprints for me. And then if I want to add a card, it prints for, and I say yes. There it goes. Notice that if I try to add again, I say yes. Nothing's changed. I can analyze my hand. There it is. And then I can also exit. So there you go. The main thing to take away from these examples is notice that I had my basic, all of my input and output was being managed by the card tester. So it was taking the input and it was also worrying about the format of the output, handling what's happening with the user, and then translating it to be able to work with the deck and to be able to work with the hand. The deck handles only the cards being dealt and only the cards that are being returned. It doesn't have to worry about anything. Okay. One thing to note is that notice that when I deleted a card, I didn't actually add it back to the deck. That's something that I would need to handle here. That's something that hasn't been tied in, so this isn't actually finished. The hand only allows people to be able to work with the array, and because it does things like add card and remove card, it manages the actual array to make sure that nothing bad happens without the card tester or the deck or the hand or anything else having to worry about it. Because everything's been broken down into classes and each class takes care of its own information, everything works. And all we're doing is we're just doing simple calls from one to call to the other. But when I do something like add a card at I, notice that I'm going to be doing something in the hand, and the hand is going to be talking to the card. Okay? The hard thing to wrap your head around is that if everyone just does their job and does their job well, the whole program works. Okay? Your job is to make sure that everyone is doing the right job and making sure that it does it properly. If you do that, the program works really well. And actually, once you get your head around that idea of object-oriented programming, the entire program itself and the entire experience of working with objects and classes is actually rather easy. But getting your head around that and getting over the hump is definitely the hardest part. Good luck with the rest of your programming. If you can get your program to this point, you're actually doing really well, where we're basically able to add and remove and analyze records. Being able to do the file import and output would be great, and is definitely a little bit more advanced, and definitely something to try for. But you want to make sure that you can do these as the basics for what you submit to me on Monday. Good luck, everyone. Hope you enjoyed the video and hope you found it useful, and all the best.